Good evening, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us tonight. This will be the last webinar until September when we resume again. On your screen, you're going to see that we've got some conference information up. It's only a few short days, 41 to be exact, till we kick off our conference in Rhode Island. And we are really excited, so be sure to get signed up while the prices are still at the $398.50, and that changes July 17th. So it goes up to $498, and we want to make sure that you get in on the best deal. So tonight we've got Dr. Andrew Hahn, who is our licensed clinical psychologist and founder of Guided Self-Healing Life-Centered Therapy Institute. And Dr. Hahn is also one of our institutional members, and he is also one of our workshop presenters in Rhode Island this year. So make sure that you come out to see him. He will be there on Thursday and Friday, I believe it is. And
yes.
Okay, I was going to say, but Thursday and Friday there, I've got him up on the screen. You can see who he is right now. So you can put a picture to the words coming through. And since he's on, I'm just going to let him take it away. And at the very end, if you've got any questions or even throughout the presentation, on the right-hand side, you can type in your questions for Dr. Hahn, and we'll get to them at the end. Until then, Dr. Hahn, you can take over.
Thank you. So my name is Andy Hahn, and I've been doing a kind of mind-body, psychospiritual, energetic, archetypal healing work for 23 years. And we put it together into a framework, and I'd just like to share with you some of the things that I've learned in 23 years, because I think looking back, I would say there are certain fundamental premises that I found unbelievably useful. So if you find them useful, that's great, and if not, that's fine too. But let's start with a basic idea. And the first idea that I want to share with you is every problem that people are suffering about, every one of them, I don't care if it's physical like chronic pain, or emotional like depression, or mental like anxiety, or relational like really bad relationship patterns that keep repeating, or spiritual like alienation. What I want to say to you is all of them, I believe, are an invitation to remembering something that couldn't be handled so that you can master it. I think that is the basic premise of all trauma therapy. In fact, I would say of all therapy. So the basic idea again is every problem someone suffers about is an invitation to remembering something that couldn't be handled. And the idea is to come into a place of mastery. And when you can master it, basically, in my experience, the trauma goes away and one of two things happens, which is either the literal problem goes away, whatever it is, or your relationship to it changes to such a degree that it no longer seems like a problem. It's just a bad experience or just an experience. So that's the first idea. Now, when there is something that can't be handled, which is just my definition of trauma, I think trauma simply is something that can't be handled, that causes suffering. When there's some kind of trauma like that, it always creates a kind of template in the body, kind of engraving. And that template acts like a magnet, and it keeps bringing back over and over and over again echoes of the original crystallizing situation until it's mastered. And since we're a body psychotherapy group, the key for us is that every one of those templates is always accompanied by some kind of discomfort. So we could say that the trauma, the story of the trauma, whatever that is, and the discomfort are exactly the same thing. So for example, if someone came in to me and said, I'm feeling anxious, and I asked them, well, when you're feeling, and the part of you that's anxious is here, what are you feeling in the body? And they say, my throat's tightening up. What I would say is that throat tightening up and anxiety are exactly the same thing. And then what I'd say is that it's not you that has the problem, it's throat tightening up. That's its name. Your name is Andy, and its name is throat tightening up. And throat tightening up is a literal being, and it's come to share a story and to tell us what it needs. So we're going to understand the throat tightening up. It has its own consciousness. It's not your throat tightening up. It is throat tightening up. That's its name. And what we're going to simply do is we're going to bring all of our attention to throat tightening up and we're going to just say, throat tightening up, what have you come to share with us? Where are you beginning? What's happening? And then anything that comes to the person, anything at all, is throat tightening up story. And the reason I think this is fundamentally important is that I would say the way that you release trauma is that you choose to bring yourself back into a situation that you couldn't handle at one point, that couldn't be handled, and you stay in a witness position. So if we could choose to bring all of our attention to throat tightening up, and then we witness what's going on, in a sense, that is mastering the problem, because instead of now being the problem, which is what happens when we have a trauma, we're just having a bad experience. But the person who's really here is the witness. So that's the first basic idea. So let's review this just briefly. Every problem we suffer about is an invitation to remembering something that couldn't be handled. And the idea is that it's going to create a template. The template will always be accompanied by a sensation, and the sensation is a being who's come to share a story of some kind of other, either a narrative, which is usually what it is, or some deeply held experience. And when we choose to bring our attention to that discomfort and let it share its story and tell us what it needs, and if it needs anything other than just to share its story, which could be anything, it could be like an acupressure intervention or a spiritual practice or anything. When we hear its story and we do whatever it needs to heal, it should balance, it should come into balance. And when that happens, the person that you're working with will know pretty much immediately, because the sensation will just disappear and they will literally feel different in the body. So that's the first basic idea. So what we're going to then do is a very simple process. The work we do is a very simple process on one level, which is we're going to find the most important thing for you to work on, which we call the highest priority intention, out of every intention we can find in the universe. And we're going to then find out where it originates, and we're going to invite and find out if we need to do any kind of practice or intervention, and then we're going to go on a journey back to where it originates. And then if it needs to do any kind of practice or intervention, it will do it. And then we see what the connection is between that story, the originating story, and the person's life right now. And then we see if the person has come into balance. And if they have come into balance, they will again know it, because their sensation will go away. And then we ask a bunch of concluding questions, like, have we learned any lessons, and a variety of questions to make sure that the person's really got it and that they can bring it out into the world. So that's the basic idea. So then we could ask the question, well, how do we know where it originates? And how do we know what we're looking for, what patterns we're looking for? And the way we do that, the way I do that is I use kinesiology. I use muscle testing. And I use muscle testing basically to ask a variety of, like a protocol of questions. So if someone comes in with 3 intentions, I can ask if their highest priority is any, some, or all of the intentions they said. And sometimes it is, and if it is, then we go on and we find out where we're going to go. Like, do we go to someplace in this lifetime? And if we do we need to know the person's age? Or do we go to some other lifetime, if you believe in other lifetimes? So if you do, you could say you're going into your genealogical past life, or a karmic past life, or a karmic future life, because things can crystallize actually in the future, which is an interesting idea and feels kind of different. But you can ask these kinds of questions about where it originates. You could ask if it originates in another dimension. There's no limit to what you can ask to find out where it originates. And then the person is going to go on a journey, and they have a clue about where they're going to go. And the way they go on the journey is very simple, because whatever their intention is, it's a blocked intention that always comes with the sensation. You invite them to become the sensation, and then you just basically ask what the sensation has come to share. And in my experience, being fairly well trained in hypnosis and doing this work, doing this work through body sensation, I have found to be more elegant than doing it through hypnosis. But that's just been my experience. I am pretty well practiced in each, because really what you're doing when you become the body sensation is that person is here right now. You're not doing a regression or a progression or anything. It exists right now in that person's experience. So they're not going back. It's just here right now, and we're talking to this being who it is. So anyway, we use kinesiology. And kinesiology is also called muscle testing. And if you don't know muscle testing, I would suggest it's a very useful skill to learn. But we use it in order to understand muscle testing, which basically says we're going to ask your body to be a means of communication for your deepest wisdom. You'd have to know that there are many levels of wisdom. There's conscious wisdom, which is sort of what you know in your conscious mind. And in my experience, that's a very limited kind of wisdom. It sort of has the power of one. And then there's unconscious wisdom that comes through in dreams or in synchronicities or in images come to you. And I would say that that's a much deeper wisdom, and I would say it has about the power of the speed of light. And then there's a third kind of wisdom, and there's a lot of good words for that wisdom. In the East, it's called chi or ki or prana or shakti. In the West, the most you could call it would be a soul level of wisdom, or the wisdom and energy that animates your body, which is sort of like your life force and your deepest intuitive knowing. And everyone knows about this deepest intuitive knowing because I haven't met one person who yet hasn't known about it, because it's just a felt sense of a yes. So it's when you just know something is true. You didn't figure it out. You didn't even have an emotion about it. You just knew. And everybody talks about it the same way, which is, I just knew. I could feel it in my bones. Even though everyone told me it wasn't logical, I knew it was true. So that's the level of wisdom we want to access. And from our perspective, that level of wisdom knows everything about everything, essentially. And it certainly knows where your problem, where your blocked intention began, and it knows what to do. And it's just a question of being able to access that wisdom. And so what we do is we ask the body to be a means of communication for that wisdom. So, for example, if I asked you, if someone asked me what's my name, and I said my name is Andy, my mouth wouldn't be answering the question. It would be a mouthpiece or a means of communication. And in the same way, we're going to ask your body to be a means of communication or a body piece for deepest wisdom. And the way we do that is for virtually everybody, when they say something or do something that's true for them, their body gets stronger. And you could press on a muscle, and no matter how hard you pressed, it wouldn't go down on an arm, for example. But if you say something that isn't true for you, or you do something that isn't true for you, your field actually gets weaker, and no matter how hard you might try to hold your arm up, if I press very lightly, your arm will go down. And so we become a team using this process to access deepest wisdom, and the client and I become a team working together on whatever we're told is the highest intention. So there are certain things we've discovered along the way doing this. And basically, the first thing I'd say is once the person is the body sensation, no matter what happens, everything is part of the process. So if I were muscle testing someone, and I know muscle testing, this actually happened once, and I was muscle testing them, and their arms stayed very strong, but they said, "You're trying to push me over." And I said to them, "That's right, I'm trying to push you over." And they said, "Stop it, you're trying to push me over, you really want to hurt me." And I said, "That's right." And eventually, after about 5 minutes of that, this person realized that they were on a gangplank and that they were about to fall in the ocean. They were in a pirate ship, and they were about to fall into the ocean. And that made sense of so many things to this person, that they were always afraid of falling into something, and they always felt like that no matter what was going on with them, they would be sort of betrayed and sabotaged. And all of these things came out in that story. So this is to say again that everything that happens is part of the process. The second thing that I would say is always listen in the literal. I will tell you a brief example of that, and then I'll tell you something more about this particular session. But to say listen in the literal, if someone, for example, says to you, "I feel weighed down," they're saying they're very depressed, and they say they feel weighed down, they feel helpless, they feel hopeless, they can't move. That's not metaphoric. That's literally a story where someone is weighed down and they're helpless and they're hopeless and they can't move. So if you listen in the literal, worlds open up, and I would say always listen that way. In fact, always just be open in that way, because everything then, worlds open up to us as therapists. The next thing I would say, which is probably a fairly controversial thing to say, is I don't think there's any such thing as resistance. I think there's only remembering. So for example, if you're working with someone and they're in their body and they start saying, I can't do anything, I can't do this, I would say the only thing you say to that is, yes, you can't do this, and because they're remembering. Or if they seem to dissociate and they go into their head and they start getting, very logical about it, you could, typically what that means is that something in the story happened that was so traumatic that they really went out of their body. So there is no such thing as resistance. And what I would say about that while I'm here is everybody can find body sensation in my experience. I haven't met one person who can't. Usually people say that the problem with getting people into body sensations is what happens if someone says, I can't feel anything. And the answer to that question is, if you ask them what they're feeling in their body and they say, I can't feel anything, that's the answer to your question. And if you then ask them a funny question, which is, you say to them, this is a funny question, where in your body do you feel I can't feel anything? I have not had one person who couldn't answer that question. So basically, the idea is you're going to say yes to everything. And as long as you remember that, you can never go wrong. And if you forget it, then you run into trouble as a practitioner. So then what I want to say is, most of what I've told you so far is fairly standard body psychotherapy. But sometimes what happens is that a person will come in with something seeming like depression, and what you'll find out is that that's not really the problem. It's a surface manifestation of a deeper intention. So I'll tell you a story about that, which is I was once doing a conference, and a woman came up from the conference and she said that she was very depressed, and she said, well, what I really want from the session is to work on my depression. And she said, I feel helpless, I feel hopeless, I feel weighed down, I can't move. And so that was her first intention. And then she had a second intention, which is that she had fear of crowds. And like she'd get in front of a crowd like she was right here, and she would start to hyperventilate, which she was starting to do on this stage. And she'd say, well, I want to do something about my fear of crowds. So I did my muscle testing diagnostic, and I asked if either of those were her highest intention, and it said no. And so it said she didn't know what her highest intention was. And what I'd say is, if someone doesn't know what their highest intention is, in my system, in my way of understanding things, it means there's an underlying sort of universal pattern, like neglect or betrayal or a grudge or a variety of other patterns. And these patterns come in sort of two kinds of patterns, which we'll talk about in a little while. But so what I found out with this person by doing our diagnostic is that she had a pattern that we call a death wish. And in a death wish, basically what that is that there's a part of this being that it wants to die. So if you muscle test, if you have them say out loud, a part of me wants to die, it will muscle test strong. And if you say no part of me wants to die, it will muscle test weak. So instead of having her focus in her depression and the weighed down feeling, we had her focus in this part that was experiencing I want to die. And when that happened, she had a terrible pain in her neck. And so I invited her to bring all of her attention to pain in neck. And what she did was she started to violently wrench her neck. This person had never done any work like this, and she was very kinesthetic, so it was quite dramatic. But she started to violently wrench her neck, and she was wrenching it and wrenching it and wrenching it and trying to pull away from something. And then she said, oh my God, there's a guillotine coming down on me, and they put me face up, and I can see it coming down on me. And she was screaming at that point, and the only thing she could move was her neck, because she was weighed down and she was helpless and she was hopeless and she couldn't move. And she was in front of a whole crowd of people, and they were saying the worst things about her. and yelling epithets and screaming and throwing things, and she said, I will never be in front of a crowd of people again. I'll never be in a crowd of people. And then she said, you know, why did you do this? She's screaming at God, and she says, why did you do this to me? I was a good Christian, and you're doing this to me. I will never believe in you. And this woman later told us that she'd felt alienation her whole life. Even though she was very spiritually oriented, she could never feel the presence of the divine. And then we found out later that she's had chronic neck pain that she's gone to many people for, specialists and a variety of other things, and nothing much touched it. So she's screaming, and then she says in a calm voice, I must have died. So we know what her problem in this situation was, which is that she didn't know that she had died. So you could say that she dissociated, if that's your worldview, or there was a lost soul part that left before she had died, and that part had never completed a death process. So what we said was, then, the problem is you didn't know you had died, and so you couldn't handle the death, so you've been trying to master it for these many centuries, if you believe it was a past life, or if you believe it was a personal mythology in their own inner world, or an undreamed dream, but whatever you would call it, they were trying to master it. So they were reenacting it. They were remembering it by living it out in this lifetime. And so what we said was, well, call all the parts back and come fully into the body, and then just let yourself fully die, and then go up to the crown of your head. At which point, she said, it was really kind of funny, she said, which one, the one that's rolling down the hill or the one that was the energetic one that was on the top of my head? And she said, well, I know which one it is. So she went out through the crown of her head, the energetic one, and she said, right away, I see light. And she said, I'm going to go to the light. And she went to the light, and she just said, I am the light. And that took about 25 minutes. This is a very dramatic story. Not all stories are this dramatic, clearly, but even when they're not this dramatic, there's subtle miracles that are always happening around this. So she's there, and she's the light, and she says, I'm done. And then we're in this big auditorium, and she starts talking to people, and people start asking her questions, and she starts moving her neck from side to side. And then she says, wait a second, I can't do this because I should be in excruciating pain, but I'm not in any pain at all. And then she says, and I'm realizing, like, I'm laughing with all of you, and I should be afraid of all of you, but I'm not afraid. And so we know something about, and she said, I feel light. I'm not feeling my depression anymore. I'm feeling much lighter. And then she said, you know, I have this sense of hope that it's like I can feel the presence of the divine. Now that is a very, very, very unusual story, because it is very rare that a whole bunch of symptoms all line up around one crystallizing event. And we found out it did because she came back to the conference next year, and she said virtually all of it held. But, you know, if in my training I had been, you know, if someone had told me you have to have a new client and they're coming in with a major depression, and they've been doing work that's been cognitive behavioral, and they've been on medication, and they were doing some energy psychology, and nothing much had really touched it, and that they had this chronic neck pain that they had a story for, that was that they were hit in the neck, which of course was a reenactment of what happened in the guillotine. And they had been to specialists, and no one could much do anything about it, because in this case it wasn't physical, it was truly energetic in its whole origin. So if someone says, you know, there's this person with this major depression and chronic neck pain and a sense of alienation and fear of crowds, I would have said, and they've been in, you know, they've been doing all these kinds of different therapies, and they've been taking medication, and they've been going to specialists, and you know, really having still difficulties in all of these areas, I wouldn't have known what to do. But knowing about these patterns, and knowing that the stories are held in their immediacy in the body, it's not so hard to sometimes have extraordinary results. Now, sometimes the results aren't as extraordinary. I had a woman who came in for a blood draw, and in my world, either using some kind of acupressure intervention or eye movement intervention, that would typically be something that would not be that hard to balance. But it turned out that in her situation, the blood draw was really related to so many different levels and so many different stories that it took us over a year. And of course, the blood draw, the first thing that came up was that, if you think about it metaphorically, well, what's a blood draw? Something is stuck inside of you and blood bursts out all over the place in her mind. And so that brought her back to some very extreme sexual abuse that she had no memory of whatsoever, and had been hidden under layers and layers of numbness. So we released the layers of numbness, and then she had to go to other lifetimes where she had betrayed trust, and she really went in a lot of different directions. And it was really quite a journey for her. And in fact, it changed her in many ways, because what really came out of that therapy was that she didn't have to be so tight and always having to be a perfectionist, which was really useful for her. So there are these patterns. And like I said, the patterns come in two realms, because if we start with life, there's no limitation to where we can look. So when you map out the universe, there are stories that are material level stories, but there are also non-material stories, and these stories are stories like of ghosts or curse or energies that seem to take you over, and they're both literal stories, but they also have their own sort of patterns to them. So people know what it feels like to be cursed, even if they don't literally believe in curses, or they know what it feels like to be taken over by something, no matter how they understand this. And I'll just give you an example, because one example of a story like this is that one of my colleagues she had had an operation, and her nerves had been cut in her neck, but she still had a terrible sensation in her neck that just wouldn't go away. And she would wear, she couldn't wear anything that was tight fitting it all around her neck, because she would have this sensation of being pulled on, and was making her crazy. And the doctor said that that was impossible because all of the nerves had been cut. So this is a very interesting story, but she said, well, I don't care if it's impossible, it's happening to me. So she found out that it was a ghost pattern, and she literally found out that she was in a hospital not so long ago, and a lot of children had died in this hospital. And she was there, and what became very clear to her as she was working on this story was all these children sort of wrapped themselves around her neck because she was the best mother around. And when she realized this, she said to them, I understand that you need a mother, but there's a far better mother for you, and you can go to this mother. And they all went to the mother that's sort of the universal mother, and all of her really profound discomfort in her neck went away right away. So it's really quite amazing. It's really quite amazing what you can do. And the kinds of miracles you can see, and and my hope is, we could really begin to change the whole conversation in psychology and in sort of the psychospiritual world, and we could say, let's open to all of life. Because if we can open to all of life, we can open to all of these possibilities for where people are stuck and what we can do for them that you couldn't necessarily open to if you start with someone's thoughts or behavior or even their awareness. So because we are multi-centered beings, and it's not just our minds, but we also have heart centers and belly centers, and there are practices around compassion and celebration and a variety of other things, so that we could open to every possibility. I think the last thing I want to talk to you about is that in my experience, there are two kinds of trauma, and it's very important to be able to distinguish them. One kind of trauma is when you're literally remembering an event. For example, well, let's say someone is agoraphobic and they can't get out of a closet. Well, one way of understanding that is maybe in some other lifetime or something, they were thrown into a prison and it was really, really dark, and somehow they're remembering, there's a bleed through and they're remembering that. So that would be literally remembering the trauma. We also sometimes remember the ways we protect ourselves from the trauma. So for example, another person, it may have been that he was a 3-year-old boy and he ran out into the street and nearly got run over by a bus, And so he runs back inside and hides in the closet and sort of forgets all about that at some point or other perhaps, but is still remembering that, so that anytime anything remotely like the original situation happens, he just has to close himself fully off, and he can't be the exuberant little boy he was anymore, because that little boy is being hidden under a protect of being stuck in the closet. So of course, in that situation, you could say that being stuck in the closet isn't the problem. It's the solution to a problem, and it's something that you choose to bring in as a way of protecting yourself. The problem is that you forget you made the choice because you make it at such a time of dissociation. So if you can just make a different choice at that point, which is very easy to do energetically, because if you know that you chose to bring in the protection, you can in one moment bring it out. And I can tell you some extraordinary stories about that. The last thing I want to say is there are also two levels of trauma. One level of trauma is more in this sort of world of matter and soul. And those traumas come through in literal narratives. So deep, deep themes will come through it, but it's always about some kind of life experience, whether it's a literal life experience or an archetypal life experience, but it comes through in life experience. But there's a whole second level of trauma that isn't really about narrative at all. It's about our deepest structures. And it starts with the idea that there are certain experiences that we have that aren't created by experience. They're the filter through which we experience life. And I would say in my world, which we don't have a lot of time to talk about right now, there are certain core fears that each personality type has that are fundamental in terms of understanding motivation and a variety of other things. So I use the Enneagram, or a system where there are 9 different archetypes, and that each of us lives through one of those archetypes. And so, for example, the first archetype is called the perfectionist. And the perfectionist compulsively has to be good or proper or ethical because there's a fear, a fundamental fear that a perfectionist has about themselves, that I am bad, that I just fundamentally do bad things. And so, of course, their personality becomes like a kind of compulsion that's a protection to protect them from a fear, which is really just an emptiness. And so if we can go deeply into those fears, what we can find is that you become freer. And you really become free of your personality structure, and you become freer of your sort of most deep perceptual modes and the ways that you process the world. You can become free of sort of the deepest instincts, like, so we think that there are 3 deepest instincts to survive, and I mean to preserve the self and to connect and to belong. And underneath each of those instincts is a kind of fear, a fear of unbelongingness, a fear of inner disconnection, a fear of not being able to survive. So when we can fully bring ourselves into the body and feel that unbelongingness or that disconnection or the fear of survival, and we can be with it, suddenly we're freed up to truly belong or truly connect or truly, truly survive without fear of death. And ultimately what I would say is the deepest of those fears is an existential fear of non-existence, which one can also experience in a way through the body. And so you could say everything, and as soon as you identify with anything, on one level it's just a way of protecting from a fear of like annihilation. But we can experience that fear. And when we truly can experience that fear, there's nothing to be afraid of. And so my sense of our work really is that healing trauma eventually is to get to a place where we're totally free just to live our lives and to say yes to everything that comes into our lives, which is what I really think that healing and the kind of work we do is about. It's about evolving so that we're truly free. So that was an awful lot in a short period of time, and I would be happy to take any questions. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of cases and I can tell you all kinds of things, but I wanted to give you guys time if there was things that you wanted to talk about, just to talk about them or to ask about them or give us your own reflections, because we're really all here together.
You can do that by either raising your hand and I can unmute you, or you can write it on the box on the right-hand side. There's a chat, and I get those. First question is, what kind of people take your trainings?
We have, well, we have different levels of trainings. So we do workshops that give a simple one-day version of our work where you basically learn the framework and a protocol, and you get a practical and muscle testing, and you get this process, this 5-step process, and then you can start to do it for yourself, for for people around you, and you'll have a fairly good result, because that's where I began 23 years ago, and it's very effective if you just do that. Anyone can take our training right now. We have lay people, or the general public will take our training. We have a 3-day training that's a much more, we'll give you a much deeper protocol and teach you 20 kinds of practices and interventions, and begin to teach you some of these things that we learn about how to conduct this kind of therapy. And then if you want to, you can go on and take the whole year, and the rest of the year is about how to deal with these patterns, like patterns of betrayal or death wishes, or sort of dealing with our core fears, or dealing with non-material things. And we've had everybody take it. I've had a lot of licensed clinicians take it, but I've had yoga therapists, and I've had just pretty much every kind of healing practitioner you can imagine, because we've been doing this for quite a while in a lot of different states and countries. And but we have a lot of people who are just doing it because they want to learn how to do the process, and they want to be in a sort of combination, learning a healing protocol and a way of doing healing in a kind of mystery training. So we've had doctors and lawyers and accountants and students and everything you can imagine. And then that's the first year. In the second year, we do a second year of the training. And in the second year of the training, we teach you 6 other things, because I think, in my experience, there are 7 kinds of levels or steps for transformation. And the first year is only about how you release blocks. So the first step would be something about how you know what you're truly passionate about. And passionate about meaning like what makes you feel really alive, and also how to be with your own suffering. So that's the first step. And then once you know your passion, then there's, well, how do I release blocks so I know what I truly desire and intend, but how do we release blocks, which is the whole first year of the training. And then there are levels of mastery and raising heart vibration, and maturity, and multiple perspective taking, and unity. And so we teach that, and all kinds of people have done, a lot of people have done the first year training. I think it's in the 700 range, and probably half those people have done the second year, and it's open to everybody. Although right now because we're getting a lot of licensed clinicians, we're tending to also do specific trainings for people who are licensed clinicians or practitioners in some way, and we make those more clinical.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, can you address traumatic brain injury and treatment?
I can, a little. I think there's 2 kinds of trauma, essentially. One is literally in the physical, and one is in the energetic. So I've been working with some people with concussions, and I mean, which is, I think, what people may be talking about here. And I'm working with this man right now who is about 30, and he was in a really, really awful car incident, and he hit his head very, very badly. And he'd been working on this for about a year, and he thought that he had got back about 40% of what was going on. And I found out that I can do my diagnostic. I found out that much of what was going on was held by energetics, that there was, there was an underlying framework that was going on here that we should be able to get really make some difference by doing this kind of work. So we've been doing it for about a year now, and he thinks he's up to about 95% of his original function. And he thinks a lot of it has to do with this kind of work, but he's been doing other things too, particularly at the end. So what I can say is, if something is energetic, whether it's, well, if something's energetic, and I can do a diagnostic that says that it's fully energetic, then I'd say that all of what looks like the traumatic brain injury may be just a remembering, but it also can say that it's physical and there's literal brain damage. And that, of course, takes a much higher vibrational capacity to do healing. And, you know, I would not say that I have that level of capacity, but I think there are people who do. But I don't. I don't have the capacity to change overtly physical things. So if there's been a brain injury where there's been literal, like, breaking of blood vessels, or you lose a part of the brain or something, if something's energetic there, we can do something that helps the healing, but we won't be able to, you know, cure it.
Okay, great. I have one person asking where they can sign up for workshops outside of the upcoming conference.
Where they can sign up for workshops, they can go to our website. We're changing our name. Our current name is Guided Self-Healing, and they can go to guidedselfhealing.org, and all of our workshops are there. We haven't set our schedule. Our workshops usually start in the fall, and we are about to set our schedule for the fall. I probably should have done that before this, but I do it with another person, and we have to coordinate. So you can go to guidedselfhealing.org, and very soon you can go to lifecenteredtherapy.com, and that's our new name, and you can sign up there for any of our workshops. So you have the workshops on, you know, doing this healing work, and then we have these workshops on, you know, how we understand people from the inside out, and then we have the trainings that we do. And hopefully soon we'll be doing online courses, but it's a new technology for me, so I'm just really learning about all of that. But that's our hope for about a year from now.
Good deal. And Joan, you can always come to the conference. Next one is, why do you prefer your method over traditional psychotherapy as well as somatic experiencing?
Well, I was trained as a traditional psychotherapist, and although I haven't done the somatic experiencing, I guess what I'd say is I think that it's more elegant. But that's just my opinion. So you know, people would have to make up their own minds. But what I would say is, if you don't have a way of doing a diagnostic, which we do have a way of doing a diagnostic, it becomes very hard to tell what the real deepest intention is. I don't know somatic experiencing well enough to know if they can do a diagnostic that would say something like, you know, that this person's terrible, you know, having to pull at everything that was around her neck was ghosts of little children. I don't know it well enough. Or if they would know whether to go to this lifetime or another lifetime. But what you often find is, and I will have to, you know, claim ignorance, because even though I've had people who've done somatic experiencing and training in our training, I haven't done it. So I don't feel enough of an expert on it to know. But if somatic experiencing can sort of find the deepest, most powerful originating stories or underlying themes or non-material kinds of themes, or distinguish sort of trauma that's material level trauma versus trauma that's personality trauma, which are very kinds of different things, then I wouldn't say it's better. I just don't know it as well enough to know. Whoever asked the question, if you know enough about it, you probably could say something about, you know, the kinds of things, because you've heard a little bit about what I say. But I guess what I'd say is my understanding of somatic experiencing is that it usually would say, and I don't know this, so I'm saying this with ignorance, that the trauma that you're looking at is the trauma that you would remember. But I don't know that for sure. And I think it probably works brilliantly for that. And if the person has any follow-up that they want to ask or share, please do, because, I don't know everything for sure.
And it looks like Jay is asking, when you say we offer workshops, who is we?
Um,
Do you offer them with somebody else?
we are an institute, so we have other people who are trainers now. So I usually do the training with another person, but there are right now 6 people in the world who are giving these trainings in various places. So we're having one right now in Taiwan, and so this woman who is one of our trainers translated our whole workbook and is doing it, which was really quite something. But there are 6 of us who do it, and then we certify practitioners. And the way that this happens is, if you want to be a certified practitioner in our system, you have to take the training, and then you have to pass a test, and you have to do some supervision, and you have to do a course on sort of ethics with us or with somebody else, particularly around dual relationships. And then you have to do a practice session in front of me or one of the other people who has been designated as a certified trainer. And so, that's who we is. But we're an institute. I'm not a lone person doing this.
Jay, I would say you could probably find a lot of information on the website.
That would be true.
Anybody else have any other questions? Comments? Let's give them just a few minutes.
Sure.
So we have a 4-hour session in the conference, and you're going to cover the majority of this in the conference?
I'll cover this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do demonstrations of how I do the work and teach people some about how I do the work, and they'll get to witness it. I'm going to do experiential things for everybody who comes, and I'm going to do different things on different days, because in the first day I'm going to probably do, some of the kinds of intentions, but, so we might do in the first day an intention that's what someone brought in, and we might do some of the patterns, and then the next day we might go to more of what you do when it's not you're remembering something, but you're remembering the protection, and I might do some of that in the, how we protect ourselves from things that happen in the material world, and then teach you how to do an essence process about how you can sort of go into your core fears and then release sort of the ways we compensate that really we never get to experience. So because the framework is kind of so extensive, we'll be doing all kinds of different teaching and demonstrations over that time, and experiential things together, and probably some practicums around some of the energetic things.
Awesome. We had one person in here said they're looking forward to it. They're coming to the conference. The next one says, how long do you typically work with clients, and does the Enneagram play a role in your kinesiology training? Did I say that right? I think so.
My training was pretty traditional. I mean, I have a PsyD, and I went to a very clinically oriented PsyD program. So I guess I can speak to this some. What I'd say is, in my experience, this goes, having done both, and I was a training director in a clinic, and I was teaching sort of advanced family and couples therapy and psychodynamic therapy. So my training background is very sort of extensive. I would say this work, in my experience, is far more effective and far more efficient, because you can do so much more just in the body, and if you can do the diagnostics, you can go very, very far. But it depends. There are some people who are coming in, and they're coming in for some very specific problem, and that might be 1 or 2 sessions. There are other people who use this as their psychospiritual practice and who come over time for, several years. But it really, if you're coming for some practical intention that's a quantifiable intention, and you don't use this as sort of your sort of spiritual practice and sort of deepen into the spiritual practice of it, it can be very short. I would say there's no average, because it depends. It's so dependent. I would just say it's quicker and deeper than the way I was trained, or I'd be still working the way I was trained. In terms of the Enneagram and the framework, we teach the Enneagram independently of this, but in order to, what I'd say is we use the Enneagram a lot in couples work, because if you can fundamentally understand what motivates, if two people can understand what motivates each other, and really what their perspective is, which I think the Enneagram, if you know it, is the most extraordinary tool I've ever seen about how to understand someone from their own inner motivation and attention and not project onto them. It's truly extraordinary. So we teach you how to do that and how to really understand sort of a person's perspective, but we also use it to ultimately what we do is, this is a very spiritually oriented work, and it's really about freedom. And freedom, from my perspective, is about being able to be in a different relationship with the things that we're most afraid to admit about ourselves. And the Enneagram says, as far as I'm concerned, although this is not how most people talk about it, there are 4 levels of things that we're most afraid to experience about ourselves. And if you know the Enneagram well, you know what those 4 levels are, and you know the core fears of each personality type. You know the core fears that underlying sort of our instinctual drives, and you can do a literal practice to be able to go into the core fears, and then you find that the core fears are really, I would say it's almost like the divine, because what the core fears say is, you know, I'm bigger than you are, and you'll never get away from me, and I've been here always, and I'll always be here, and no matter how hard you try to get away from me, you never will. And of course, if you take off the label of the fear and you just experience that energy, it's a being, it's a energetic that says, I'll always be with you, and I've always been here. So we teach you how to transform core fears into what really is our deepest divinity. And we teach you how to do that in a very intensive training that's the last training of our first year training. And so we use the Enneagram as a foundation for understanding these underlying fears and how to transform them so we can be free.
Fabulous. I have a comment from Jessie, and she says, I've been working with Andy for some time as he's helped me work through PTSD, many years of trauma. I've done a lot of personal healing work, and this is the most profound and the most interesting. Thank you, Jessie, for sharing that. I have another question. It says, what makes a good practitioner of your method, i.e. background, personality? Is there something specific that calls out and says, you know, I'd be great at this?
Yes. The first thing is to come in, I would say the most important thing is to have a very, very open mind and a very, very open heart, and to assume that life is really the one who knows, and that our clients really are the experts at being able to understand what's coming through them, and what we have is a map. So we're not the expert. Everything gets turned upside down. What we have is this profoundly elegant map of how life is, and we can help people go and find their own answers. So the first thing you have to do is you have to know that your expertise, that people aren't coming for you to fix anything, that our work is not about taking away, it's not, we have to let go of our preferences that, you know, we want something for someone or from someone, and just say we are fully here with you. That's the first most important thing. The second most important thing is to be able to really realize that there is no such thing as resistance, that everything is part of the process, that from my point of view, resistance is a concept that's made up by therapists when they don't know what to do with their clients. But that's my point of view. So that really what you have to be able to do is just say yes to everything. Whatever it is, you have to be able to say yes, and say in presence, and say, I can be with you wherever you go, and I won't have any prejudices about that. And if you think you're in a story where a dark energy is taking you over, then a dark energy is taking you over. I'm not going to call you psychotic necessarily, and I could tell you some stories about that that are really quite something. So I would have to say the biggest thing is an open-mindedness, and then a profound curiosity about the nature of life. And those are the things that make the best practitioners in my experience. But, you know, if you can be there in beginner's mind and you can read a protocol, you can do some extraordinary work. So it's a both and.
Good. I'm sorry I arrived late. Do you have any, by any, oh yes, I do. You can view this after it's over with. It will be on our conference site, which is the usabpconference.org. It will be on Andy's page. All you need to do is just look for the speakers and find Andy, and you can review it as many times as you'd like. Can you give us some more client stories whom you've worked with? Maybe one?
Sure. I'll tell you the most extraordinary one I ever had, I would say. Well, one of the two. I had a woman who was clearly DID. If you know what that is, it's called Dissociative Identity Disorder. She really lost time, and she had some what are generally called psychotic features. And I've worked with a lot of people with very, very bad trauma. She had as bad a trauma as anything that I've ever heard of, including incest and rape, and she actually watched her mother murder her sister. It was really quite extraordinary. And when we finally did a diagnostic about what was the sort of root cause of sort of some of these psychotic features and her total loss of a sort of container, it said in our protocol it was something called a superimposition. And a superimposition is just some kind of energetic that takes you over. And so I said to her, because I thought she was a pretty good reporter in some ways, I said, the muscle testing is suggesting that when you were 8 years old, some kind of energy took you over. Does that make any sense to you? And she looked at me really funny, and she said, I know exactly what you're talking about. She said, when I was 8 years old, I was at this, she was Southern Baptist, and she was at this sort of fire and brimstone sermon that her father was giving, who she was having a lot of difficulty with. And she said, during that thing, something came and took me over, and she was already having a lot of problems, and she was with a psychiatrist, which is an interesting story, and she told the psychiatrist that something took her over, and the psychiatrist put her on Thorazine, at which point she vowed never to tell anybody again that something had taken her over. So she said, I know what you're talking about, and so we went back to that. That was very much living for her, this idea that this energy was here, and you could feel it literally. And so when she went into it, she was able to remember and have this experience of being this 8-year-old girl, and the experience of having this energy take her over. And then it said she knew what to do, which was really quite extraordinary. And she looked at me like I was funny, and then she started to do this dance. And she was very interesting. She was 1/16 Native American, and she was just getting interested in this stuff but didn't know very much. And she started to do this dance that was one of the most intricate dances that I've ever seen. Now, this woman has probably never danced in her life. And she's dancing around in a way that I would assume was Native American in a very intricate pattern. And she does this for about a minute, and she says, she looks at me like, what am I doing? And then she does it for another minute, and you literally can sort of feel the room move, and it gets lighter, and she said, I'm done. Now, this woman had been hospitalized every year for the prior 6 years before I met her, and I can tell you she still had a lot of problems after that, but she was never hospitalized again. And I'll tell you another story that was like that. I had a colleague who was one of those same people I've ever met, and she's a woman. She's a totally heterosexual woman. And what came up for her, she came in to say, Andy, something is really wrong here because I'm seeing these young girls and I'm having these feelings like, look at, the words were coming to me and these feelings were coming, like, look at these young girls with their beautiful titties. And she said, something is really wrong. And we found out that something happened a month ago, and she couldn't imagine what it was. But when she went back into the sensation, she knew what it was, which is a very interesting story, which was that she had a boyfriend who was a police officer that was looking into a lot of cases around sexual, trafficking for young children, and she had made love with him, and she said, I could literally feel this energy coming off of him into me, and it had been in his field, and she said, I want you to know, if I wasn't the sane, this would have overpowered me, which really made us begin to wonder what's happening to a lot of people who are in prisons. and you can't understand what's going on. And I would say that we have to open up to whole new ways of understanding what's going on for people who are doing some of these things. I think that you can't just explain why that happens. Or I can tell you another case of a woman who was totally anemic, and what it turned out was in our system, I had done 5 sessions with her, and they were amazing sessions, and every time she left, she said, this is extraordinary, but I'm really not getting much benefit. And I finally realized that the problem with her was she took in these things and nothing stuck, and it was like the same thing was happening to the healings as was happening to her nutrition, which is everything that just went through her. And so I said, oh my God, and then I could check, and I said, what's going on here is your boundaries, your sort of energetic boundaries are fractured. And this woman then went into the sense of being pulled apart in holes in her, and she went into this most extraordinary story of being tortured and drawn and quartered and being alive while her arms and legs were pulled out of her. And when we put her back together energetically, she became, all of her anemia went away. It was really quite something, because she could hold nourishment and nutrition. And I could tell you story after story after story. I have so many stories, it's just, and like I get to be with them all, so it's been, you know, I don't know what to say about it. But, and then some of the really extraordinary stuff is what happens when you do this over time, and you see how it sort of builds off of one of these builds off the next, and it just goes in amazing directions.
Have you ever compiled your stories into a book? I mean, like a book to read.
I'm doing it right now. I'm about 75% through, and the problem is there's 2 different books here, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it, because there's a book for the general public, which is about these stories and how you can do it simply for yourself, and then there's a book for practitioners, which would be much more about some of the deeper patterns and how you work with them. And I couldn't figure out whether to write one or 2, but I think I'm coming to some conclusions around that. But that sort of has stumped me a little bit. But I'm on the way, and there'll be stories out soon.
Fantastic. I can't wait to read it. Keep us posted. One last question I'm going to answer, and then we're going to wrap it up, folks. How has this work impacted your own healing journey?
It's unbelievably. I mean, first of all, I do it for myself, because you can begin to know your own answers to like the diagnostics, because you can just feel it in the body. This is amazing stuff for intuition. And I also do a trade with my colleague. We trade sessions, and I would say my sense of equanimity, I mean, how it's affected me is like I have a basic sense of serenity and equanimity, and like, you know, it's like I have this, it's not that I don't get, you know, something recently happened to me that was very, very difficult that earlier in my life I think would have certainly sent me into a major depression. And I'm aware of sort of some of those feelings, but it's just not the same. And I think it's just because I just keep working on, you know, places about things I couldn't handle, and sort of like whatever's going on in the current situation, I can trace back and sort of do this energetic work, because you can remember everything. And, you know, I just feel freer. I mean, I guess the thing I'd say is I feel freer, plus I have a lot more empathy for what it's like for everybody else who's doing it. I guess that is what I can say.
Great. Andy, thank you so much for being on with us, and I can't wait to meet you in July. And I hope everybody else can join us. And if you have any other questions, you can email me, and I'll filter them on over to Andy, or you can go to his site. So I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you so much. And everybody,
yes, I'm happy to answer questions.
Everybody have a wonderful evening, and it will be posted by this weekend. So come back and review it. Thanks.
Thank you all. I appreciate you coming. I'm very grateful.
You bet. Bye.
Are you still there?
I am here.